Galnet News, your galaxy in focus, 28th of March, 3301. In today's news, the war for Lugh, a retrospective. In search of Lawrence, the Alliance appeals for explorers in a new colonization program. And Commander Doc Mango sets out to circumnavigate the galaxy. Our top story today. The situation in Lugh appears to be on the way to recovery after a temporary peace has been established and the Federal Navy forces have, for the time being, withdrawn. But how did such a vicious and hard-fought conflict begin in the first place? The origins of this conflict date back to November last year, when the Crimson State Group began to recruit independent pilots for their own purposes in Lugh. This group would unite and organize into what became known as the Lugh Freedom Fighters, and along with the Crimson State Group, would take up arms against Lugh for equality in search of what they described as a return to the old ways, a return to the ways before the feudal kings of old stamped their will upon the common man to benefit no one but themselves. Although momentum for this fledgling group of freedom fighters was being gained slowly, by the 31st of December last year, they had a 45% influence in the Lugh system, just 3 percentage points behind the Lugh for Equality party. By the 8th of January this year, that figure had risen to 58% and put them as the majority influence holders in the system, where civil war threatened to emerge from the political turmoil on several occasions, although all-out conflict was not to happen at this time. By the 22nd of February, the figurehead of the Crimson State Group, Eamon E. Leary, gave a speech in Alioth, claiming an 87% approval rating for his faction, although, despite his efforts, he was unable to gain audience with Alliance officials. Later during his visit, the Crimson State Group spokesperson survived an assassination attempt and was rushed to safety, but a member of the crowd was less fortunate. It appears that the Crimson State Group's attempts to bring the Alliance aid to their cause really brought the situation in Lugh to the fore. The past fortnight has seen a devastating war rage through the once peaceful system. Fearful that yet another rich, powerful system would soon leave the Federation fold, President Yasmina Halsey ordered the Federal Navy to suppress the populist uprising. Thousands of Federal pilots flocked to obey the President's command, and in the early stages of the war, the Federation dominated the skies of Lugh. Countless sons and daughters of Con lost their lives in an attempt to stop the Federal Navy from simply crushing the rebel forces. Their sacrifice bought time for the Crimson State Group to come up with a plan. As the Federation continued to rampage its way through the system, members of the Dukes of Macun, Emperor's Grace, and the East India Company engaged in guerrilla tactics to keep the Federation's attention away from the work being carried out by the main Crimson State Group strike force. Splitting their forces in two, the Crimson State Group focused on obtaining enemy intelligence and collecting weapons for their ground troops. All the while, they made sure to deliberately avoid engaging in open conflict with the vast Federal fleet. Despite the valiant efforts of the Crimson State Group allied fleet, the Federation managed to tear through the Crimson State's air defenses, exposing the Crimson State-controlled outposts to a series of attacks by Federal Marines. The Federation looked unstoppable as they stormed through Seager Port unchecked. The turning point in the war came during the Federation's attack on Reed Gateway. Cormac E. Leary led the defense of the outpost personally, and after several days of fierce fighting, the Crimson State Group finally managed to achieve their first victory by successfully defending Reed Gateway. However, the reality is that it was more a failure on President Halsey's part than a victory on behalf of Crimson State. The defense only succeeded due to the Federation running dangerously low on weapons for their troops. As soon as it became apparent that the Federation was having difficulty acquiring the weapons they needed to end the war, the Crimson State Group took advantage of the military intelligence obtained during Operation Dullahan to attack Hartsfield Market. The battle for Hartsfield Market lasted for almost 5 days, during which time the Federation managed to establish complete dominance over the skies of Lugh. Unfortunately for President Halsey, air superiority alone was not enough to win the war, a fact she soon learned when the Crimson State Group tricked her into ordering a strike against Federal refugees attempting to flee the conflict. The strike against Federal civilians by the Federal Navy, coupled with the capture of Hartsfield Market a few hours later, caused mass confusion and disenchantment among Federal pilots operating in the area. Mercenaries who had previously fought for the Federation began defecting en masse, bolstering Crimson State Group forces to the point where they almost equal the Federal forces in size. As a result of having gained control of Lugh's satellite defense system during the capture of Hartsfield Market, the Crimson State Group managed to force the retreat of the Federal battlecruiser from its position around Lugh 11. Then, with the help of thousands of mercenary defectors, the Crimson State Group was able to re-establish control over the majority of Lugh's airspace. For now, the Federal Navy has retreated to fallback positions in Kaka and other local systems. Reports from Lugh suggest that the Lugh for Equality Party has established a ceasefire with the Crimson State Group, as both parties attempt to agree on what course of action will be best for the people of Lugh. The system is still rife with unrest. The war has caused the local populace to resent both the Crimson State Group and the Federal Congress. Although the Crimson State Group has managed to establish their dominance over the system, whether they can keep it in the face of internal and external opposition still remains to be seen. And now for something a bit different. Some commanders aim to be deadly in combat or choose a life of piracy. Others gorge themselves on trade profits, and others still set out to chart the distant reaches of the galaxy. Galnet took the time to speak to the man in search of Lawrence, otherwise known as Commander Steve Lawrence, who has something entirely different in mind: to visit every place in the known galaxy that is called Lawrence. So far, this rather curious man has visited Lawrence Colony in Kurunguti, Lawrence Holdings in Wongsher, and Lawrence Station in HIP 39720, and plans to continue his Lawrence-based expedition to its completion. When asked about his unusual extracurricular activities, Commander Lawrence had this to say: "We may not be as famous as the Jamesons or the Riders or any of those other well-known commanders from the early days, but the Lawrences were flying the same systems for generations. Then my great-great-grandfather, who was rated elite by all accounts, just upped and flew off into the unknown and was never heard of again. But there were stories, you know. I'm sure most families have those stories, right? Stories of some vast fortune or some great deed by some long-lost distant relative. Well, anyway, we've got those stories too, and I've decided to try and find out if they are true. I plan to visit any starports, outposts, or any other object named after Lawrence and see what I can find out. I've been to a few already, and I have several more already logged into my navigation system. If I find nothing at any of those, well, I'll just have to save up for an ASP and head into the unknown myself." Some exploration news now. Beyond the borders of occupied human space, the vast mysteries of the universe are waiting to be discovered. The last 1,000 years of human history have been shaped by our combined ability to travel through the stars in search of a better future. Yet what has humanity done with this precious gift? The same thing we've always done. Wasted it. Greed and war run rampant throughout the galaxy, and the concept of freedom has become nothing more than a buzzword spewed by people who have never known it. The Alliance knows that there's a better way, but to prove it, they need your help. For the next 2 weeks, the Alliance of Independent Systems will be collecting exploration data for an exciting new colonization initiative due to launch later this year. Commanders interested in working with the Alliance should deliver any information that they've uncovered in relation to potential colony sites to Purple Power Interstellar aboard Ziemkowicz Ring in Sue. And following on from that story, it appears that the Alliance aren't the only ones to have their fingers in the exploration pie. Earlier this week, in the imperial capital of Akinar, an explorer by the name of Commander Doc Mango signed a contract to circumnavigate the entire galaxy in search of Earth-like planets, in the hopes of opening up possibilities for long-range exploration outposts. This operation has been codenamed the Eridanus Mission 1.0. The whole trip will be somewhere around 130,000 light-years, and we expect to see the explorer Doc Mango back in Akinar sometime in the beginning of the next month. That's the Galnet news for today. Tune in next time to keep your galaxy in focus.